The importance of vets in the NBA is more important than people tend to realize. There's not a lot of glory that comes to it, but many embrace their role as a role player. They perfect the art of hidden hustle and grit, not often shown on the stat sheet, and they're well-respected locker room guys, and often provide key mentorship through the young youth. Amir Johnson comes to my mind when I think of these things. They perfectly sum up his career as a whole. He's a true professional that means a lot to the team and the locker room. And those aren't even my words. Those are Brett Brown, his former head coach while he was with the 76ers. He always did the little things. They didn't always show up on the box score, but his persistent hustle was always appreciated by the teammates and fans alike. And players like this, I feel like, deserve a look back through their career. This is Amir Johnson. Amir's career starts off where most do in high school, where he dominated as a 6'9" forward out of Westchester High School in Los Angeles, where he tore up the scene and won California's Mr. Basketball in 2005 and was named a McDonald's All-American. He was a 4-star recruit and the number 7th ranked overall power forward in the country according to Rivals.com. With all this success he had in high school, he decided to declare for the NBA draft straight from high school back when you could, and he was selected in the 2005 class with the 56th overall pick by the Detroit Pistons at the age of only 18, and he was in fact the last pick ever selected straight from high school. Now, Johnson's career did not get off to the most ideal of starts. He actually only appeared in 3 games the very first season and 8 the following, totaling just 11 overall in his first 2 seasons in the league. This is in large part due to him being a raw athlete, needing time to hone his game and find his fit, and at the time of starting, he realized he was only 18 years old. And he was also stuck behind people like Rasheed Wallace, Jason Maxiell, Antonio McDyess, and Chris Webber, all in the similar position on a competitive team in the Detroit Pistons trying to win playoff games. Now, when he did play, he did show freak moments of athleticism, like his first basket being a windmill dunk. But with limited playing time, he found himself in the D-League at the time, in modern day called the G League, and he actually excelled, averaging 18.9 points, 9.7 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 1.2 steals, and 3.1 blocks. And with these type of numbers, he would earn Player of the Week a couple of times. With this success, Detroit took notice and gave him a new contract of $12 million over 3 years and a chance to play in the NBA with a consistent role. Over the next 2 seasons, Johnson actually ended up playing a total of 124 games for the Pistons and became a key asset off the bench, excelling as a role player that does the dirty work in true Detroit fashion. He ended up averaging 3.6 points and 3.8 rebounds in the 2007-2008 campaign on a playoff team that made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where Amir and the Pistons would eventually lose to Paul Pierce and the Celtics, unfortunately. Now, during this time, he didn't play a whole lot during the postseason when it came around with the classic 10 to 8 roster spot shrink. With this going into the next season, he averaged similar points and rebounds at 3.5 and 3.7, but he actually has a block a game, which was key for his defensive efforts and earning himself playing time more than his offensive output. During this time, he actually managed to start 24 times on this team that made the playoffs, but minutes again were cut during the postseason, and this time the Pistons did not make it as far, running into LeBron James and the Cavaliers in the first round, ending up in a sweep. When the postseason came around, Detroit decided to trade him to the Toronto Raptors alongside with Sonny Weems in exchange for Carlos Delfino and Roko Jukic in a 3-team trade with the Bucks. And this ended up being a great move for Amir Johnson personally and Toronto. In his first season in Toronto, he'd actually end up playing in all 82 games with a drastic increase in minutes. And he was playing key minutes in the rotation as well as a backup center and power forward, kind of behind backing up Bargnani and Bosch. And his numbers increased as well as due to result, averaging 6.2 points and 4.8 rebounds. Even though numbers are not always Amir's thing, it was nice to see an increase in bump. The thing is, though, later that year, Bosch decided to leave for Miami, and this created a perfect opening for Amir to step into. Amir also was a free agent this offseason, and he instantly decided to re-sign with the Raptors, seeing the gap with Bosch leaving, and signed a 5-year, $34 million contract to stay. And his minutes instantly shot up to 25 plus a night, where he consistently started for the Raptors. While this was happening, he's becoming a fan favorite because of his hustle and how much he embraced the city while playing alongside the likes of Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, and very well complementing both of their games through his little effort plays and the rebounding. Amir statistically would peak with the Toronto Raptors in the 2012-13 season with career highs in minutes at 28.7 points at 10, rebounds at 7.5, 1.5 assists per game, and 1 steal per game, providing the jack-of-all-trades type of player that's needed on every roster. The following season, Amir would actually end up having his career high in points at 32 in a game against the Los Angeles Lakers, and this really cemented himself with the fan base and the people across the league as a solidified, true vet and a guy you can just come to and rely on to do multiple things every night. Amir was now playing at his career best on a playoff team that would end up with a 3 seed in Toronto, but they would actually face the Nets in round 1 and would go down in Game 7 in a crucial fashion to Paul Pierce in his game-winning block last second that would send them home packing. But Amir played very solidly this whole entire series. He would actually end up being third in his team in points with 11 and rebounds at 6 a game. So he did all this as well with a high field goal percentage from the floor, continually providing well-rounded support to Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. The following season with Toronto, the stats and the role would continue to remain the same with the team trying to break through. The Raptors would actually end up with a 4 seed, but again went down to a lower seed in the playoffs, but in way worse fashion to the Wizards. And oh yeah, Paul Pierce was a wizard on that team and sent a big part of why Amir in Toronto went packing home. Now Amir played solidly again this series with 11.5 points per game and 7 rebounds, but players like Kyle Lowry struggled this series to really push the Toronto Raptors over the top. Johnson in the offseason was a free agent again and would end up signing for the Boston Celtics with a 2-year $24 million contract. And this was in large part because the Raptors couldn't match the money, so he left for Boston. And the fit was very perfect as well for Boston and Amir because he would provide them an athletic energy hustle forward at center, which the Boston Celtics currently didn't have because their centers and forwards were the like of Zeller, Hollinger, and Olynyk, so he provided a new fresh look. The fit wasn't exactly perfect, but he actually did end up playing a decent amount of minutes, but it was a slight dip in minutes to 22 a night, and so does numbers take us a little bit of a dip to 7.3 points and 6.4 rebounds and a block, but he was still a fan favorite as always, and I don't think that could be more highlighted than his return to Toronto and a warm embrace and welcome he got in his return. The surprise team of the year in the Boston Celtics would unfortunately be bounced in round 1 to the Atlanta Hawks, showing growing pains in the series, but also showing a bright future. And this would never be more so than next season, where Amir would play a big part in this role while he started 77 games that year. And 2 games of those stand out in particular to me. In his January 13th game against the Pacers, where he scored 14 points and recorded a season-high 18 rebounds. In the other game on November 2nd, where Amir Johnson torched the Chicago Bulls with 23 points, but a career-high 4 3-pointers nailed. When the playoffs came around, Boston was actually the number 1 seed in the conference and was a legit contender. And Boston would go very far and prove to be such. They made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals before inevitably losing to LeBron James and the Cavs in 5. Now, unfortunately, this go around, the playoffs were not as ideal for Amir. He only would end up playing about 10 minutes a night and scoring 2.6. I think this was due to his minutes shrinking due to Olynyk and Horford eating up most of the time. Boston would end up making some big moves in free agency in the offseason, bringing in Gordon Hayward and trading for Kyrie Irving, but this ended up filling up most of Boston's cap space, so they couldn't really re-sign Amir Johnson. So Amir went off to the 76ers on a 1-year $11 million contract. Now the money was definitely a fit, but the play not as much. He would end up being behind Dario Saric and Joel Embiid, who were definitely both in front of him in the rotation, so he ended up resorting back to a secondary unit role, coming off the bench and providing energy. Most vets would struggle with this decrease in minutes after such a long time. Johnson excelled. Now his minutes did shrink down to 15.8 minutes and his averages went to 4.6 and 4.5, but he would end up making a very big impact, actually winning the NBA Hustle Award during the 2018 season. Now basically the Hustle Award includes things like screen assists, deflections, loose ball recovered, charges drawn, and shot contests, all the little things that don't necessarily come up in the box score. Amir excelled at this season, and he has excelled through his entire career, and it kind of got the reward for that. Now this was on a Philly team that would end up finishing as a 3 seed, so his role was huge. In the playoffs, the Philadelphia 76ers would actually end up running into Boston, Amir's old team, but they would go down, and unfortunately that had to probably sting a lot for him, and yet again even more so because his minutes were down, and this is in large part because Saric and Embiid were taking up more minutes, and Ilyasova had jumped him in the rotation at this time, and this would kind of signal his descent out of regular playing time, unfortunately. Amir Johnson would end up returning to Philadelphia next season, signing a 1-year $2.39 million contract, and this is in large part because Philly wanted to reserve and have his veteran presence back again in his invaluable work ethic shown through the Hustle Award. Now the season didn't really go exactly how he planned. Early on, on February 22nd, he actually volunteered to go down and play for the Delaware Bluecoats because he had a long stretch of games where he did not play at all. So he actually requested to play down, and the 76ers granted his wish, and he played 2 games down for the Bluecoats simply because he just loved playing basketball and missed playing. Amir would end up returning to play for the Philadelphia 76ers, but in a way more limited role, and averaging a career low in minutes at 10.4 a game. He ended up playing in 51 games, though still at least, but in the playoffs he barely played at all. But Philly would actually excel this time around and would reach the Eastern Conference semis before being knocked out in famous fashion by Kawhi Leonard's shot. Amir Johnson's long run in the NBA had finally come to an end, unfortunately, after the season, but his playing career not quite just yet. Johnson would actually end up going on to join the G League Ignite after this season, which I feel like was a perfect fit for him. A vet to teach young guys, up-and-coming prospects, things about the game. Even players like Green on the Mavericks credits him for improving his finishing around the rim, and I just feel like that was kind of a perfect send-off, him passing his knowledge on to the next generation of guys. To summarize Amir Johnson's career in the end, it was never flashy or pretty, but he lasted way longer than the average NBA player with 14 years under his belt. And this is in large part due to his grit and hustle while being a great locker room influence, which will always be underrated. Thanks for watching this video, it really means a lot to me. And if you have any random players you'd like to see videos on in the future, please comment them below, no matter how random they are. Thanks again for watching, this has been Skid Denver.